All right, let's talk about stropping for a minute. So, one of the most important things about strops is that you keep them covered. Whether it's this sort of slip case, this is from Tom Scandian, Spoon Carving with Tom, or even if you just wrap it in a rag or an old t-shirt. It's really important that you cover your strop and don't just stick it in your tool bag rattling around with all your other stuff. For two reasons. You want the strop to remain clean. You don't want grit or metal dust or wood chips or anything on this material. And you also don't want this compound getting on your tools, on your tool handles, on any of that sort of stuff. So if you have a strop and it's just loose in your tool bag, wrap it up in a rag or an old t-shirt. You got to keep it separate from whatever else you're doing. Now the thing that makes a strop work well is to have either very thin or extremely stiff leather that is backed by something hard that won't give. So you don't want to take super squishy suede and put it on a pine board, because there's going to be that much more give, and that leather is going to wrap around the edge as you're stropping, and it's actually going to dull your edge. What you want is to use a hard, stiff leather or a very thin leather like this kangaroo leather, and back it with some hardwood that's been milled really nicely so that it's super flat, because any wobble in the surface is going to be translated through the leather to the surface of your knife. So you want it to be perfectly flat and smooth. You want it to be glued down nicely without any lumps of glue, and you want to keep it covered. Now, when it comes to stropping, a lot of times people have strops that they'll either clamp in a vise or put on the tabletop, either on some non-skid matting, or some strops come with that, or some strops come with a handle. The problem with the ones that come with a handle is that as you press down on it, this has some give to it. And so it's hard to be accurate about what engagement the blade is having against the strop when it has some play in your hand like this. This is a style strop that I had Tom Scandian make for me after I saw Daniel Lundgren using something like this. I call it a long strop, and the nice thing about it is that by bracing against my chest and holding it here, it allows me to really hold everything steady, and I'm looking down at the blade as it's going, and I can make sure that I've got really nice, perfect edge engagement on it. You'll notice with the stropping that I'm going away from the edge, whereas with sharpening, I tend to always go towards the edge. And the reason you don't go towards the edge with stropping is you would sometimes cut the leather, and that would damage the strop, make it more difficult to strop well in the future. So let's talk about compounds. The compound I'm using on this is a little lump of Lee Valley Veritas honing compound. I don't know how it compares to like some of the cheap green compound. There's also some white compound. Compound that you can buy online is, my impression is that it comes in a whole bunch of different grits, and has different consistencies. Some are more waxy, some are lighter. You can buy metal polish paste or Tormek paste. I like how the wax compound here is just a little bit neater and cleaner than the Tormek paste that I was using before on my earlier strops. And you'll notice how it's been applied in this cross-hatching method. You don't need to scribble a whole bunch of stropping compound on the leather, and in fact that's a problem, because on a microscopic level, areas where you scribbled more are going to be raised up above areas that you didn't scribble as much on. So by applying it in this cross-hatching method, you get a really maintain an even surface on that strop. I'm using medium pressure. If you were to do this on a strop that was on a surface, you would use two hands, one finger on the bevel to make sure that it was nice and fully engaged. I, as always, like systems that I can just hold in my hand and pay attention to the engagement of the bevel. I will say that no amount of stropping makes up for a poor job sharpening. If you don't get your edge geometry correct, or if the bevel geometry needs addressing, stropping is not going to help you. That being said, if you do a good job sharpening and you strop, your knives will perform better than if you didn't strop. It really makes a big difference. So this strop that I designed has smooth leather on one side and the suede on the other side. The suede is the one that you put the compound on. Smooth leather you don't put the compound on, and it just acts as that much of a finer grit. So the compound, the suede side has whatever grit the compound is. Sometimes it's 15,000 thereabouts. The smooth leather, I would presume, is smoother than even than that. And so you do that last. And I'm doing, I don't know, 10 passes, but it's kind of arbitrary and just depends on, sometimes people will strop multiple times during a given spoon, and I've never been one of those people. I will tend to strop after sharpening, and then I'll go and carve a bunch of spoons, and then I will, and I don't tend to strop in between spoons or even while I'm in the process of carving a spoon. That being said, I'm actually doing that here because I'm carving this walnut ladle, and this fresh walnut is super hard. It's so hard. You know, if you are stropping more regularly, you don't need to do as many passes. You might need to do 4 passes if you're stropping every half hour or so of carving. That's not me. So come up with your own process that works for you. But again, stropping only works if you've done a good job sharpening. The key to stropping is to have a super thin leather or a very stiff horse butt type leather that's very hard, backed by something that is perfectly smooth, perfectly milled, and very hard. You can strop just on the wood itself. If you were to put compound just on this piece of wood itself, it would do an okay job. And I used to strop with a dowel on the inside of the hook knives. But now I use this strop stick that again is made by Tom Scandian. I don't know anybody else who makes these strop sticks. I do highly recommend them. I've found that they make a huge difference in how well my hook knives work and what finish I can achieve with them. And again, it's the same motion as sharpening. And so I'm using this block so that this can wiggle and this can adjust with it, and that stays self-leveling like that. And again, you'll notice that this strop stick has a case that keeps it covered up. So if all you're using is a wooden dowel, which is fine, wrap something around it so that wooden dowel doesn't get compound all over your tools and on your hands, and that you don't get grit and stuff on the dowel itself. Very important to keep your strops covered. This strop stick, though, has suede on one side and leather on the other side with cases to cover both of it. And I would say if you're going to get one strop to start with, get the stick strop that does hook knives, because hook knives benefit the most, more so than sloyd knives, from stropping. A hook knife that is well stropped can just do so much more than a hook knife that is not stropped, whereas sloyd knife, the difference is slightly less.